नौकरी हो गई, उठा दिन तकदा जावा, तू ही मेरी नौकरी हो गई।
Wine stepped into the Jeon household, the familiar warmth greeting her. As she stepped into the kitchen, Mrs. Jeon was already setting the breakfast on the table. The moment Mrs. Jeon spotted her, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Wine, good morning, sweetheart." The woman greeted her with a beaming smile. "Have you eaten yet? Come join us for the breakfast." Wine smiled politely and shook her head. "Thank you, auntie, but I already ate," she said with a soft smile. "Where is Isha? We are going to be late for school." Mrs. Jeon chuckled, glancing towards the stairs. "Look at you already, but Isha is still sleeping. I just called her for breakfast many times, but she hasn't come down yet." She needed to be serious, acting up to her age. She sighed in distress. "Will you go up, dear, and wake her up for me?" Wine nodded happily. "Don't worry, auntie, I'll go get her." Wine made her way to stairs, excited to wake up her best friend. But as she reached halfway up, her foot slipped. She shrieked slightly, her eyes squeezed shut from the sudden rush of fear. But before she could hit the ground, a strong arm wrapped around her waist, while another hand grabbed her wrist, stopping her fall. Wine's eyes widened as her body froze. Realizing she was safe, slowly she opened her eyes and found herself staring into Jungkook's intense gaze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him. Jungkook's grip tightened slightly, his face unreadable. His touch was firm, protective, and for a second everything else blurred for her. She had been crushing on him for first moment she saw him, and it's been more than 2 years, almost 3 years ever since she moved next door to Jeon's. But he had always been distant with her, avoiding and not acknowledging her presence. Even to the moment she believed that he was avoiding her on purpose. Wine was frozen, lost in his gaze. Her mind screamed at her to say something, but words refused to form. His breath caught in her throat as her feelings overwhelmed her, but their moment interrupted when Isha appeared on her bedroom door. "What happened?" I heard a scream. She stood outside her bedroom, eyes widening as she saw her brother holding Wine. Jungkook, realizing their position, quickly let go of Wine, clearing his throat as he helped her stand properly. "Someone has a wish to break their pretty face early in the morning," he muttered, acting nonchalant. "Be careful next time," he told to Wine, his voice calm but slightly gruff, as if trying to shake off the moment. Without another glance, he turned and walked downstairs. Wine, still dazed, could only watch him disappear around the corner. Her heart was still racing, and she barely registered Isha's presence until she felt a light tap on her arm. "You are really bad at hiding your feelings, you know that?" she teased, nudging Wine gently. "Your face is showing everything." Wine's cheeks flushed, but she couldn't deny the feeling that had only grown stronger. Isha sighed, shaking her head playfully. "I'm telling you, Wine, Oppa is way too cold for you, and you should find someone else." Wine didn't say anything, her heart still caught up in the moment. No matter what Isha said, she couldn't stop herself from falling for Jungkook more and more each day. Isha shook her head, seeing the awestruck look on Wine for her brother. "Come on," she finally said, dragging Wine down the stair. "Let's breakfast before my mom started shouting again." Wine sat at the breakfast table, finally convinced by Mr. Jeon to eat at least something, as they eat, making the usual light chatter, when footsteps echoed from upstairs. Finally, Jungkook descended the stair, properly dressed this time, his hair perfectly styled. Looked more handsome than ever, and Wine's eyes instinctively turned towards him. She felt her heart skips a beat, but quickly turned her gaze back to her plate, not wanting anyone to notice. "Jungkook," she called her son, seeing him all dressed, moving out. "Where are you going so early?" "I have some important errands, Amma," he replied, his tone distant as he moved towards the door, clearly in a hurry. But before he could leave, Mr. Jeon's sharp voice cut through the room. "Jungkook, sit down and have breakfast." The tension was immediate, thickening the air around the table. Jungkook paused, his jaw tightening, but he turned back, grabbing the chair beside Isha, sitting down silently across from Wine. Everyone resumed eating, but the atmosphere had shifted. "I heard you finalized the negotiation of the new deal." Jungkook shook his head slightly, still focused on his plate. "No, I didn't." Mr. Jeon's face darkened. "Why not? It should have been done by now." The terms weren't good enough. We lose more than we gain, he replied evenly, not meeting his father's gaze. Mr. Jeon scoffed, his tone taking a mocking edge. More excuses, Jungkook. Maybe if you weren't so distracted, you learn how to handle things properly. Or maybe you just don't have it in you after all. I noticed the way Jungkook's hand paused, his jaw clenching as he stared down at his plate, his knuckles white around the fork. The tension grew thick as everyone felt the anger radiating off him. Jungkook finally spoke, his voice cold and measured. I know what I am doing. I won't rush into something that'll hurt the company in long run. That's the problem, Jungkook, he shot back, his voice dripping with the disappointment. You always think you know best, but all I see is someone who is afraid of taking responsibilities. Jungkook's grip tightened at the fork, but instead of responding, he abruptly stood up from the table. I don't have time for this. Mrs. Jeon immediately stood, trying to soothe the situation. Jungkook, please. But before she could stop him, Mr. Jeon raised his hand, silencing her. Let him go, he said coldly, eyes still locked on his son. Jungkook stormed out without another word, the tension lingering in the room even after he was gone. Van's stomach twisted, knowing how strange Jungkook's relationship with his father was. She glanced at Isha, who remained quiet, used to this kind of exchange. I'm sorry about what happened earlier with my dad and Oppa, she finally said, her voice soft. I know it must have been uncomfortable to witness. Vine shook her head, giving her friend a small smile. It's okay. I mean, I knew things weren't good between them, but I don't really know why they are like this. Isha hesitated for a moment before continuing. You have been with our family for long enough, Vine, and everyone really adores you a lot. You are practically family to us, so I think it's only fair for you to know the truth. Vine listened closely. Isha took a deep breath, keeping her eyes on the road. Before you moved into our neighborhood, Jungkook Oppa was sent to juvenile detention center for 1 year. Vine eyes widened in shock. I don't know properly either, as no one in house talks about that incident, and I was only 11 at that time. All I remember that was the first time I saw Oppa raised his hands on Oppa for tarnishing the image of family, as the police came to the house arresting Jungkook Oppa for. Vine gasped, covering her mouth. That can't happen. He won't do something like this. She doesn't know Jungkook for years, but all the time she had spent at Jeon house, she had realized that Jungkook is very well-mannered person. Even he could appear cold, but he wouldn't do something solo. Isha smiled sadly, looking at Vine. I know, right? We all were shocked. He couldn't do something like that, and Jungkook Oppa himself admitted that he didn't. And it all fake, but the girl was from his school, and her charges were serious, as he had witness to prove her, and Oppa couldn't prove his innocence. So he was sent to detention center for 1 year to repent for his mistake, as he was only 16 at that time. Vine couldn't imagine the pain Jungkook might have gone through. Her heart ached for him, even more knowing why he was so guarded. I know it hit him hard. The only person who believed Oppa was my mom. My dad, he didn't take it well and blamed Oppa, accusing him for tarnishing the family's reputation. It destroyed their relationship. When he came out of a year, he was a different person, cold, distant, constantly fighting with my dad. I have tried to talk him about it, but he won't even open up to anyone, as he was accepted that everyone believes he did it. Even he didn't. Vine swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't deserve any of that. No, he didn't, she agreed softly. That's why he avoids girls. He doesn't want to risk anything like that happening again. And my motive to tell you this is because I know you like him. But he's been through too much, and I don't want any of you to get hurt, even your intention are pure, Vine. Vine didn't respond right away, lost in her thoughts, as Isha word only made her feeling stronger for him. Knowing the pain Jungkook had endured, understanding the walls he had built around himself, it didn't make her want to move on. It made her want to break through those walls and reach the real Jungkook, the one hiding behind all that hurt. Because no one supported him, no one believed him. She feels connected to him because she knows how difficult it is to stand alone, bear everything silently. She's been doing for years too, as her mother already left her alone and her father have barely paid attention on her because he already had another family to look after. He just sent her money as obligation or duty to fulfill her needs. After all, she was just an illegitimate child, unwanted kid. She is even more connected to her grandma who had actually raised her since she was a child, and only family she had by her side. Wine stayed down at her hands. I get what you are saying, Ish, but after hearing all this, it just makes me want to be there for him even more. Isha sighed knowing there was nothing more she could say to change her mind. The sound of glove hitting the skin and the scuffle of the feet on the mat echoed through the gym. Jungkook was in boxing ring circling his opponent with a cold, focused expression. His opponent panting heavily, throwing wild punches in desperation. But Jungkook dodged them effortlessly, his movements swift and precise. "Come on," he taunted, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that all you got? You're weak, you can't even reach me." His opponent, fueled by frustration, swung again, only to miss as Jungkook slipped out of the way with ease. "Jungkook, that's enough," he muttered under his breath, but he didn't stop watching. Inside the ring, Jungkook smirked as his opponent stumbled forward, completely worn out. "Pathetic," he muttered. Decided he had enough, he stepped back, ready to end the fight, turning his back. "Jungkook," he shouted, warning him, but before Jungkook looked back, in just that split second, his opponent threw a wild punch, landing square on Jungkook's cheek. His head snapped at the side, stumbled back a little, a bruise already forming. Jungkook clenched his jaw, his eyes darkening as he slowly turned his head back to his opponent. "Never turn your back until the fight is over," Jungkook smiled, looking at the audacity of the exhausted man in front of him. "You know the person who attacks from behind called?" The opponent was about to strike again, but without a hesitation, Jungkook launched one devastating punch at his jaw, knocking the man out cold. "Coward," he whispered darkly, "and I hate them." The opponent crumbled to the mat unconscious, and the fight was over. Jungkook stepped out of the ring, grabbing a towel and wiping the sweat from his face. Blood from his busted lip mixed with the sweat, but he didn't seem to care. Jimin approached him, shaking his head. "We had a meeting in the morning, and you are here not even picking up my calls." Jungkook tossed the towel aside, avoiding eye contact. "I needed to clear my mind before the meeting." "Did something happen at home?" Jungkook let out a bitter laugh. "That's nothing new." Jimin sighed, knowing the tension between Jungkook and his father was a constant source of anger. "So you really going to show up like this, with a bruised face and busted lip?" Jungkook shrugged, unbothered. "I'm not groom they are coming to see. It's just a business deal, and that require my skills, not my face." Jimin rolled his eyes. "Still, do you really think showing up like this going to leave a good impression on client?" Jungkook's expression darkened. "I don't care if they want to do business with me. They should look at the company P&L sheet, not my personal matters." Jimin sighed, admitting defeat. Fine, let's go. We're already late." "Oh my god, he's so perfect," she squealed, eyes glued to the television as the dramatic scene unfolded. The male protagonist was saving the female protagonist from the antagonist, and Isha practically swooned, clutching a pillow to her chest the moment he takes the female protagonist in his embrace after killing the antagonist. "Why don't guys like this exist in real life?" she sighed dreamily. "I would be marrying them right away." Wine checkered her eyes, glancing at the Isha's over-the-top reaction. "Because it's just a drama, and real life is not perfect, not even character themselves, as everyone have flaws," she teased, even though a small smile lingered on her face. "Dramas only show the good side of the main leads, but what if they started to show the bad side of protagonists as well?" Isha looks at her in confusion. "No need of villain then, because hero will become the villain itself," she laughs. "More like human." Isha couldn't understand what Wine wanted to say. But aren't a hero is hero because he does always everything right, and villain is villain because he does all bad stuff? That's what distinguishes them. She gasped. Why don't tell me you are a sucker of red flags? What? No, that's not what I mean. We all know no one is perfect, but it's still wonderful, beautiful, or valuable in its own way. The perfect idealization of everything is so unrealistic. Unrealistic? Come on, Ryan. It's just a show. Dramas and movies are just a escape from reality. At least there we could see everything happy at the end. You're right, but I want something imperfectly perfect. Agreed with the happy ending part though. They both laughed together. Just then the front door opened and the both girls instinctively turned to see Jungkook walking in looking rushed. One eye followed him, her heartbeat quickening slightly, but he didn't even glance their way. He was already heading upstairs. Jungkook, dinner is almost ready, she called out from the kitchen. I'm not hungry yet, he replied curtly as he disappeared up the stairs. Mrs. Yeon sighed, arranging the plates on the dining table. Isha plopped down in her chair, rolling her eyes. Looked like he's still in bad mood since morning. Mrs. Yeon wiped her hands on her apron, then looked at Isha. Go call your brother down for dinner. Me? She quickly shook her head. No way, Oppa looks like he's still angry. I'm not going. Mrs. Yeon sighed again, but this time her eyes landed on Wine, who was still standing by the couch. Wine dear, could you call him down? He might even listen to you. Wine hesitated, glancing nervously at the stairs. She didn't want to get caught in the crossfire of Jungkook's mood, but she nodded. Okay, I'll go. With a deep breath, she made her way upstairs, her heart beating just a little faster. Wine stood outside Jungkook's room, her hand hovering near the door. Hesitating, she wasn't sure if she should knock or turn around and leave. Just as she mustered the courage to knock, the door swung open, revealing Jungkook freshly showered and dressed in comfortable clothes. Her heart fluttered at how effortlessly cute he looked, but her gaze quickly shifted to the bruise forming on his cheek. Without thinking, she lifted her hand to touch it, concern evident on her face. Before she could make contact, Jungkook caught her wrist in the mid-air, stopping her gently but firmly. What are you doing? He asked, his tone flat but curious. Wine blinked, snapping out of her trance. Oh, Auntie is calling you downstairs for dinner, she said, trying to sound casual. Jungkook sighed, releasing her hand. Tell her I have already eaten outside, I'm not hungry. Before he could step back inside the room, Wine spoke again, her voice softer. How did you get that bruise? His expression hardened slightly, his voice turning cold. It's none of your business. Wine nodded, not wanting to push further. Just take care of it, it looks bad. I will, he muttered, clearly wanting the conversation to end. You should go. With that, Wine nodded again and turned to leave. As she walked away, the door closed behind her, a soft hurt echoing in the hallway. Jungkook sighed, relieved to finally be alone, and lay down on his bed. Barely 5 minutes had passed when he heard another knock on his door. He groaned in frustration, dragging himself up, already exhausted from the day. He swung the door open, expecting more interruption, only to find Wine standing there again. What now? He asked, his tone slightly irritated. Did you forget something? Wine shook her head, holding something out towards him. I just wanted to give you this for your bruise. She knew he won't treat the wound pretty careless when it comes to take care of himself. Jungkook glanced down to see a bandage in her hand. He reached out to take it, and for a moment his irritation wavered, replaced by something softer, though he eyed it well. His eyes flickered over the bandage and he realized it was a small pink Hello Kitty one. Wine gave him a small shy smile before quickly turning and disappearing down the hallway. Jungkook stood at the doorway staring at the bandage in his hands. He turned it over, examining the cartoon character on it, and then looked down the hallway. Wine had just vanished. Jungkook's cold demeanor softened, replaced by a calm he couldn't explain. No matter how hard he tried to keep his distance, every time he was around her, his walls crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Why did she always have this effect on him? She made him feel things he didn't want to feel, forcing him to be gentle, to be the soft person he had worked so hard to leave behind. He had learned hard way to shield his heart, and he wasn't about to change that for anyone, or so he told himself. Sighing, he slipped the bandage into his pocket. It wasn't the first time Wyatt had given him something like this, but he cherished each little thing she gave him. Not that he ever let Wyatt know, of course. He'd grown used to her small gesture over the years. Even if he tried to act in front of her that he didn't pay much attention to them, still he acknowledged them in his own quiet way. With another sigh, he closed the door, keeping the bandage in his pocket as he lay back down. Good morning, everyone, the teacher said, standing in front of the class. I hope you all are ready for today's lesson. But first, I have a news for you. Everybody exchanged curious glances. Mr. Wang was known for being unpredictable, and Ryan had a feeling something big was coming. I'm assigning a project, he announced, causing the entire class to groan in unison. The assignment will be due by the end of the week. Isha immediately groaned louder than the rest, slumping in her seat. Don't tell me he's being serious, she whispered to Ryan, who gave her a sympathetic look. Mr. Wang continued, unfazed by the murmur spreading through the room. This project will also carry significant weight in your final marks, so make sure you put in your best effort. At the mention of the final marks, the murmur grew louder, and more groans echoed around the classroom. Isha buried her face in her hands. How are we supposed to finish this in such a short time? She whispered, clearly frustrated. Did he even think before giving assignments a total?
Ryan and Isha sat on the floor in Ryan's room, surrounded by papers and books. Isha rested her head on her hand, clearly bored. Can we take a break? Just 5 minutes, she begged, looking at Ryan with tired eyes. Ryan shook her head. We just started and you're already tired? We have to finish this by the weekend. If we keep taking break like this, then it won't going to complete ever. Isha groaned, slumping back. But I'm hungry. Let's eat something first and then we can continue. Anyways, we should not be starving ourselves for this. Just as she finished speaking, Ryan's grandma entered the room, carrying a tray filled with delicious food. Isha's eyes lit up immediately, her energy renewed. Wow, what a perfect timing, Nance, she exclaimed as a smile filled the room while Grandma just smiled looking at her. The two girls quickly dug into the food. After finishing, Isha leaned back, patting her stomach. Now I feel sleepy after eating so much, she joked. Ryan rolled her eyes, giving her a playful scolding. Yeah, we haven't even covered 10% of our assignment. We agreed to finish a big part today. Isha pouted, pleading with wide eyes. We can do it tomorrow, I promise. My full focus on it. Before Ryan could respond, they heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. Isha immediately perked up, recognizing the familiar sound of her family's car returning from the function. She couldn't able to go with them earlier because she needed to work on her project. They are back, she exclaimed, jumping from her spot. I'll be right back. Without waiting for Ryan to stop her, Isha dashed out of the room, leaving Ryan shaking her head in exasperation. Sighing, Ryan gathered her things and followed Isha out of the house. Mr. Jeon slapped Jungkook hard across the face, and Mrs. Jeon was desperately trying to stop her husband. Stop it, please, she begged, her voice filled with desperation. This isn't the way. You embarrassed me again. He spat, glaring at Jungkook with furious eyes. In front of my friends, after everything I have done for you, you repay me like this? Jungkook stood rigid, his jaw clenched, not flinching as his father raised his hand again. I'm not interested in your deals for setting me up with your friend's daughter, he muttered coldly, staring at the floor. As Mr. Jeon's hand was about to strike again, Mrs. Jeon caught his wrist, stopping him, but that didn't stop the words. You have never cared about this family and your responsibility towards us, he sneered, pulling his hand free from Mrs. Jeon's hold. All I asked for was one thing, and you can't even do that. Jungkook's eyes darkened at the words of his father, and he muttered under his breath, It's all about you. Suddenly everything went still. Mrs. John stopped in his tracks, his face flushing with rage. He glared at Jungkook, stunned by the words. What did you just said? Jungkook raised his head, finally meeting his father's furious gaze. His voice cracked with the weight of years of anger and pain. It's you who didn't care about this family, never cared about me. All you care about is your fake reputation, your profits, and this filthy society expectations. Mr. John stopped after hearing his words, and maybe the first time Jungkook had tried to talk back to him in years. Isha, who had been watching in shock from the doorway, finally moved. She headed towards Jungkook, trying to place herself between him and their father. Please, don't do this, she whispered, pleading with him. But Jungkook wasn't done. His voice grew louder, the pent-up frustration pouring out. You didn't believe me when I told you I was innocent. I practically begged you, but you sent me to that place like I was some kind of criminal. Never thought what it would have done to me, and now you're using me for your deals, your connections. Angry tears welled up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. A father's duty is to protect their child from outside threats, yet you acted the worst than any stranger who could harm me. And yes, you have hurted me most way possible than outsider even can. Still though, his fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. You hate me. You hate the person I have become, but this who you made me. And because of you, I despise relationship to the point I have lost my faith in them. Still you tried to force me to be in something that I despise the most. Mr. John stood still, momentarily speechless after hearing everything, while Mrs. John was crying silently as the weight of Jungkook's words sank in. The tension in the room was suffocating as no one dared to say anything. I'm done living by your rules. I don't have strength to follow them anymore. I'm sorry. Without another word, Jungkook stormed past Isha and Mrs. John. Ryan, still standing at the gate as tears filled in her eyes as well, saw Jungkook leaving the house in rush. Ryan quickened her pace, catching up to him, but before she could call his name, Jungkook got into his car, slamming the door shut. Ryan stood there watching him, her chest tight with worry as he drove away, the tail lights disappearing into dark. All she could do now was hope he would come back safe. Jungkook had disappeared for days without leaving any trace, and the house felt emptier with each passing moment. Mrs. John was constantly on edge, her face pale with worry, while Mr. John's frustration only grew. Isha tried calling him multiple times, but each attempt went unanswered. Even Ryan felt a deep sense of unease, her thoughts consumed with where Jungkook could have gone after storming out that night. Everyone in the Jeon household was unsettled. They knew Jungkook was prone to disappearing when he needed space, but this time felt different. His absence lingered heavier than before. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes before he left, the anger, the pain, and the weight of everything he hadn't said. Meanwhile, Jungkook decided to stay at Jimin's place. His best friend's apartment was a safe place where he could lay low and deal with his thoughts. He didn't want to face anyone, especially not his father. For days, Jungkook stayed there in silence, barely speaking to Jimin, who respected his need for solitude. The ache in his chest refused to go away, and no matter how much he tried to shut out the world, the tension from everything Jungkook jolted up from his sleep, a little sweaty, and Jimin placed a glass of water beside him, finally breaking the silence, knowing what's bothering his friend. Are those voices still haunting you? They never left actually, he said, sighing, rubbing his eyes as he takes the glass, drinking the water. So did you thought about when you gonna talk to them? He asked carefully, trying to read Jungkook's face. I didn't thought about that. Jungkook, you can't hide forever. They're worried about you. I'm tired of lying to them. Jungkook stared blankly at the ceiling, his voice hoarse when he replied, I'm not ready to go back. Not yet. Jimin sighed, sitting down beside him. But you gotta face them. Disappearing won't solve it either. Jungkook knew he was right, but he wasn't ready to face the storm waiting for him back home. Not yet. The dim lights of the lounge flickered as Jungkook downed another drink, the burn of the alcohol doing little to numb the storm raging inside him. He leaned back, trying to lose himself in the loud music and blurred faces around him, but it was futile. The past days had been a haze of anger, frustration, and isolation as he avoided everyone. Suddenly, through his clouded vision, he saw a figure stepping into the lounge, dressed up in a simple clothes that stood out against the glitzy crowd. He squinted, confusion dawning as his vision cleared. It was Ryan. What is she doing here? He muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. Ryan, visibly nervous, looked around and spotted him. She tried to approach, her steps hesitant, clearly out of place in the club's rushous atmosphere. Jungkook's gaze darkened as she drew closer. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice thick with annoyance as she reached him. I came to find you to bring you back, she said, her voice barely above the engrossing music. Jungkook was annoyed seeing her here, as he never believed that Ryan would be the one reaching out to him. He let out a bitter laugh, a little bit intoxicated, mocking her words. Bring me back? You shouldn't be here in the first place. Just leave, Ryan, he said, turning away from her, as if her presence was nothing more than an irritant. Jungkook, it's urgent, she insisted, her voice shaking but determined. He snapped back at her. Why are you so persistent? Can't you see? I don't care. Just leave. If my own family doesn't care about me, what the hell you do? His voice was harsher than intended, but his frustration was boiling over. That's not true, Jungkook. But he shut her up, telling her to leave. Ryan was still adamant to persuade him, but a man from the crowd approached her, his gaze gleaming and unwelcome. Hey, come with me for tonight. The man leered, mistaking her for the one of the club girls. Ryan immediately stepped back, trying to escape the situation. No, I'm not. The man grabbed her arm, his words becoming more vulgar. Panic flashed across Ryan's face. As she tried to walk away, her focus still on Jungkook, but the man tightened her grip. The moment Jungkook's attention snapped back to Ryan, his eyes widened in panic. Anger seeped through him, seeing the unknown man forcibly trying to touch her. He immediately shot up from his seat, his face now cold as steel. Without a word, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it painfully. The man howled in agony, eyes wide as people around them turned to see the commotion. Let go of her. Jungkook rolled, his voice dangerous. The man tried to pull away, attempting to throw a punch, but Jungkook dodged easily. In one swift move, Jungkook had butted him, sending him crashing to the ground. Blood poured from the man's nose, and Ryan gasped, stepping back in shock. Jungkook didn't give the man another glance as he grabbed Ryan's wrist, dragging her out of the club without a word. The pulsing music of the club faded into the background as Jungkook dragged Ryan outside, his grip on her wrist painfully tight. She winced, pulling away slightly. Jungkook, let go my hand, she said, her voice barely rising above the noise. He turned to face her, his brow furrowed with anger. What the hell you were thinking coming here? His eyes flashed with frustration. Do you think you can just waltz into my life and claim you right over me? It's not like that. Then what it is? Do you think am I a kid that needed to be taken care of by you? He snapped, his voice cold. You need to stop looking after me. I'm an adult and I can take care of myself better than you. Ryan's heart sank as he continued. You have been interfering into my life, acting all clingy too. Stuff we know each other. I have noticed it, but I didn't say anything until now. I don't need your assistance, just leave me alone. He screamed. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. She looked down. I didn't know you felt that way about me, she whispered, her voice breaking, lips trembling. His harsh words hung in the air, and he paused when he saw the tears streaming down her cheeks, travel to chin, drop on the floor under. Her next word shattered something deep inside him, a pain he never felt before. You know, Jungkook, you're just like your father, hurting others because you are hurt, not realizing there are people who actually care about you. She wiped her tears, taking a deep breath, looking at him with her cold expressions, and Jungkook didn't know why his heart twisted in pain seeing her like this. I came here to tell you that Mr. John is admitted to hospital. He had a heart attack yesterday and his condition isn't good. Auntie and Ish is really worried. You weren't picking up the calls. Jungkook felt the ground shift beneath him, the anger draining from his body as shock set in. He looked back at her, but the damage was done. The harsh words he'd spat out echoed in his mind. But I got it after hearing the truth from your mouth and how much you hate me. So don't worry, I'll promise you that I won't ever show you my face again. Thank you for bearing me all these times. Without waiting for a response, Ryan turned away, hailing a cab, leaving Jungkook standing there frozen. The weight of his mistakes and harshness crashed down on him, and he was left dumbfounded, staring at the empty space where she had just been. What I have done.